Tammy Allen is going to get our panel discussion going and help moderate and guide that group of people. We've got, so Tammy is acting as the chair, Simon Kozak from Equally Well New Zealand, Maggie Toko from the Victorian Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission, Anu Dingra from... your replacement. Excellent. From SANE. And unfortunately, Emily Unity is unwell, so they won't be able to join us. But our own Russell Roberts is, I understand, stepping in to act as our fourth panellist. So please welcome.
Hello again. Sorry, urgent phone call took me away and I'm like, I gotta go, bye. So welcome to the People's Panel, and good news, this is the last thing before we all let you go home and enjoy your lives and take amazing learnings from the last couple of days with you. So I have some amazing people on the panel here with us today, some of whom you already know. We've got Simon, of course, you know, marketing and communications. The slow speak, isn't it? Like everything's an acronym, isn't it? For both Ember Koroi Tokatini, an NGO in New Zealand, but also for the Equally Well movement in New Zealand. We've got Jacqueline, my colleague from the other state, the state we don't talk about. No, a wonderful both lived experience and an incredible Indigenous and Aboriginal lens on the work that you do in Victoria in the Commission. Thank you. We've got Anu, who's a lived experience leader for SANE, and you hold the diversity and inclusion portfolio, which is fantastic. And our mate Russ, who's not only our national chair of Equally Well, but also Professor of Management and Leadership at Charles Sturt University and chair way too many things for me to list. So we've got some great people on the panel. And I've only got 3 questions for them because I think you've got some cool people up here that you might want to ask some questions to at the end of the panel. I did preempt them with these questions. And I think, Lee, were we going to put one slide up too at some point? There's no hurry. Yep. So I'll just launch straight into the first question and I'll give them all a bit of a time to answer in any particular order. But my first question is, what's your biggest learning or takeaway from either the last 2 days or the Equally Well movement in general? I know you look ready to go. Let's go.
Hi everyone, Anu here. The biggest takeaway for me has been inclusion. I'm biased towards inclusion because of the portfolio that I hold, but what works for one particular group will have a positive impact to other people. So for me, the social and emotional wellbeing framework is so important. I'm of a culturally and linguistically diverse background, and for me, I related and relate so much to the SUB framework. And this today has just ticked that box again for me and reiterated that inclusive practices wherever we are, wherever we work, make so much of a difference. And one thing I will take away as well is Eric's talk is about green immersion and all of that. That's something that I was doing, but didn't know there was a huge research body behind it. So that's me.
Awesome. I know, Jacqueline, do you want to add to that, particularly from that diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island health? What are we kind of missing in some of the conversations we've had over the last couple of days?
Am I speaking now? Terrific. Thank you. I have only stepped in at the last minute, so I've only been here this morning. But I have been thinking, and I really wanted to shout out to Rachel's immensely important work and talk about the importance of social emotional wellbeing in that framework. And I do believe that it's amazing. We think we've got new ideas, but in fact, they're quite old ideas that we're coming back, and we really need to perhaps reflect on that and actually acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and any Indigenous group have always looked at health as not being this medical model, but in fact, it's about where you're at. We think about the places that we access our health, but it's also places, they're the same places and the same people who understand us, who are in our community, who understand that we might be going through a period of having to look after some others because of carceration, domestic violence. We understand kinship really well, but we also understand that if you do not understand the social determinants of health, you're not going to get it right. But I also think there's a lot to say about intersectionality, and we hear a great deal about it, but I think the more open and more diverse views you hear, particularly in lived experience, the greater diversity, the more likely you're going to get it right. I'm going to talk about and the concept of what is culturally safe, and cultural safety is such an important idea that we get this right, not only in mental health but actually in all of our health, and that is about making sure that it is a safe place for mob to come and have a talk. And I think about that there have been changes to the National Health Law so that now Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders can now call out racism by any practitioner who is covered by the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Agency, otherwise known as AHPRA. But that is fundamental, and I think when we start tackling racism, we start tackling bias, we understand better ways of doing it. I think we really get it right. I also wanted to reflect on the ideas and listening to the lived experience leadership and having that extraordinary honour, but also heavy is the crown that wears it, of being one of the highest, having that role of commissioner and having that title lived experience. And both Maggie and I really are working so hard, and we're still in establishment phase and it might not be so obvious, but we are working really, really hard for Victorians, particularly in the area of lived experience leadership. So I look forward to talking more about that.
I mean, a couple of things I take from that too is we've got 60,000 years worth of knowledge and wisdom that never had the word mental in it.
No,
right?
No. And we talk about going back to country, talk about healing on country, and these are not new ideas, but it is fabulous that everyone's finally catching on. And I think, finding ourselves being grounded back in nature, where you belong, where does a place that you feel like you belong? Because where you feel you're belonging, you're going to feel like you're understood, and you're probably more willing to let that healing happening.
Yeah. And you shared with me at the break a story that reminded me that overshadowing doesn't just happen because of our mental health issues, but it happens with racism as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I'm going to call out to Auntie Helen Milroy, who said, referendums set this country back by 50 years race relationship-wise. I now know everywhere I go, I sit in a room and I think 50% of you, or even more, might have voted no, and you expect me to have institutional trust?
Yeah.
You want me to trust you? That is really hard. We have got a long way to go, my friends, and I think, particularly since this is Reconciliation Week, really tough pill to swallow this week, I'm going to say. A
speaker yesterday at Reconciliation Week said the vote wasn't about a constitution that no one reads. It was about what you fellas think of us.
Yeah.
And we heard an answer, and no wonder there is so much distrust. And as allies, we have to work alongside and behind you to lift those feathers.
Yeah, and I don't think lived experience or bush medicine or all of those ideas, we've always been there. We've always listened to each other. We didn't perhaps label it lived experience, but we do it. We do it really well.
Wisdom, it was called.
Yeah, it is. And passing on those traditions and wanting to make the place a better place.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Simon, what have you learnt over the last couple of days? I think he's on. No. Steeler knows. Oh.
It is on, is it? Yeah, there we go. Right, okay. What have I learned? As you probably gathered, as an individual and also in New Zealand, we have a bias for action. But what I've learned is that we can't achieve anything, I don't think, as a group without each other. And it's clear from the breadth of expertise and the depth of expertise in the room that there's no shortage of talent, there's no shortage of ability, that there's no shortage of range of talent, there's no shortage of will. So key learning for me is that the action's all well and good, and it's what I advocate, but also we need the proof, we need the substantiation, we need the research that makes sure that the action isn't so much bluff and bluster, and we need the action to make sure that the research isn't so much hot air. So what I've learned is we definitely need each other, but we can't wallow together.
Yeah, fantastic. It comes from a Marcoms guy to get something done in a sentence. That's awesome.
Couldn't work the microphone though.
Russell, you chair this whole thing. You've brought us together, and comes sometimes with the knowledge that you already know everything when you stepped into the room. But surely there's been some new learnings or some new directions for research or where we should focus next. What have you learned?
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. I think there's some great frameworks that's really helped us going forward, and we're going to take a lot more. But one of the ones was the ethos, the pathos, and the logos, and the importance of that going forward. The ethos, we have to do this properly, with integrity, with respect, with equality with one another. That's our grounding. But the logos, we have to have evidence behind that. We're taking a case. We need the hard evidence. People want that. And the pathos, we need to have the stories. We're all narrative cultures. We remember stories, we forget statistics, and see the importance of sharing our stories. And then I think today, the overlay of that is an ecological approach.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel and Eric. Ecological relationship to community, and that's the out of the box, Simon, in terms of, well-being. It's just not about mental health and physical health services. It's about connection to community, our community, and it's about connection to the environment. And that's an ecological approach that we really need to take forward. And we've forgotten that ancient wisdom. And then taking it out of the box, Simon and Tammy, to use that to activate and to advocate. I just think bringing all those together has been a great framework for us to work together to take this to the next steps.
One of the things I love about a forum like this, which isn't about just listening to speakers but having a lot of conversations and workshops, and is that you have these little mini epiphanies as you go along. And actually, Peter, where are you? When you stood up and you were speaking about the dignity of risk before. It reminded me of an epiphany that I'd had in the last few years, and it reminded me of something that we probably need to be aware of. So when we're asking our clinicians to do better, and we're asking for ourselves to advocate better for physical, there is the slight danger that we might slip into a coercive practice where other things will need to be checked and we don't get a choice about that as well. And it reminded me of a person that answered the survey that I produced over the last week, who said, yeah, my doctor's quite good. She wants to check me for diabetes, but I'm terrified of having my blood taken. So I think we still have to have compassion for those who are not ready to make those choices for their physical health as well. And I relate to with a cancer patient, and I've used this when it comes to seclusion and restraint. With a cancer patient, we don't force someone to have chemotherapy. We don't coerce them to go and have chemo, but we coerce people with mental health diagnoses to do things that they might not want to do. So it's something to keep remembering. So I'm going to move on to the next question now, which is more of a hypothetical, right? And I've got my version of the hypothetical on the board. So at the moment on the left, we've got what happens now. We've got our GP and primary care, we've got community specialists, we've got secondary and tertiary services, and everyone says that every time I go into one of these things, I have to tell my story again and again and again and again. So taking a leaf from a thing called the blockchain, if anyone's got cryptocurrency, you'll know how that works, but the blockchain works like you own your data, people can add to that data, and that you can read and go through the history of all of that data, and everything is the truth, and you can work your way back, but you own it. So if we had our health data on our phones, we could take that and we could choose who we give that data to. And so in the middle is the person who owns the data, and around the outside are the people I choose to give that data to. So my hypothetical situation is this is one of the things I think that would get us towards an equally well future. But in 2034, 10 years from now, we're all in this room celebrating because we're dismantling equally well. We don't need it anymore. We've achieved it. So what has happened in that time that we can dismantle equally well? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I don't mind going first on this one. For me, it's very simple. The environment will have changed. And that's the vision of Ember, which is the company I talked about earlier that we started 6 years ago. Our vision is for a New Zealand that has a better understanding and a better relationship with mental health and addiction and a better reaction to it. And I think we have seen it in other areas of life. I was chatting to someone earlier. I've seen it over my lifetime with skin colour. I know that if I talk to my children about players in their sports team, they won't use a skin colour descriptor. They'll say Chi-Chi's the winger. And I firmly believe that has come through calling out what's not acceptable. It's come through repetition. It's come through modelling behaviour. And it's not perfect. I'm not for 1 minute saying it's perfect, but I've seen the change, and I firmly believe that we can see that change in health equity if we keep. It's the old recovery adage of consistency over time, and we stick to our guns and we keep going. But what will have changed in 10 years? It will be the environment that's changed. I don't think it's up to us to only change individuals and only change ourselves. The environment has to change. So things that are currently acceptable, some of the things you've just talked about, have to be no longer acceptable and no longer in currency. In fact, I really hope that my grandchildren, when they're looking at some of the things that are normal for me today, I just hope they raise their eyebrows and think, holy shit, is that what went on back in 2024?
True. Thanks, Simon. Yep.
Coming from a lived experience perspective, particularly here in Victoria, I would like to see the fact that lived experience leadership, lived experience roles are sustainable and embedded and are just part of good clinical practice, and that they are accepted, and it is just a given that they will continue and have ongoing funding, and this short contracts that last a year, last 3 years, is just totally unsustainable for people. It doesn't allow people to actually, build. It doesn't allow people to have a career. So I think that there is part of me that radically, and I'm pretty sure this might be slightly controversial, I think we should take the decision making about how we spend our taxpayers, particularly the tax in Victoria that is paying for all the transformation, that actually should be taken out of the Department of Health, out of government, and put into an independent body that allows for better decision making, because I think it would then no longer be so political, and it would no longer be. But there is determination there. My other hand is that if it continues to be within, government, and it is a decision-making, that we have people who are actually informed, who understand the value of lived experience, understand mental health, and it is no longer so clinically based and so risk-adverse. And there are far more greater understandings of a human rights mental health act that actually is kinder and understands it. I'd like to see far less people at the Mental Health Tribunal. I would like to see ECT being something that is so rarely used and in such an extreme case, and not used compulsorily like it is. So I have great hope for us all.
I'm glad you said that, because I had a conversation with Trev, our treasurer, last week. And very diplomatically, I said that I didn't think that anyone should be making budget decisions around mental health if they didn't have independent and impartial advice around those budget decisions, because everybody who's giving the treasurer advice has a very invested interest in the solution they're proposing.
And, you know, I just reference that model of idea of being taken out. For people up at the FEMS carer and family connection, there was actually that model is being used in the US in a state where they do that. So I think it is possible. It's just radical thinking. But and how do we get that across the line? I'm not sure, but at least I can start floating the idea.
Plenty of models out there that the people fund, yeah.
And I might take Jacqueline's first point a little bit further. I'd like to see that services have lived experience, just not funded on a sustainable basis, but evidence of that at every layer of the organisation, you know, from frontline service to managerials, from clinical safety through to the executive. And really, that should be a part of accreditation. We accredit health services. That should be the quality of a decent health service, where lived experience is at the centre in terms of not having a vested interest. I think the other thing I'd like to see, and I'd love this to be the case, this would fit in really nicely with my retirement in 2034, is that where we don't need Equally Well anymore, sorry Lee and Vic and others, is that every time you have contact with a mental health service, they ask about your holistic health.
Yeah.
Every single time they think about you and your physical health. Every time you have contact with a physical health service, there's no diagnostic overshadowing. They don't discriminate against you because of a history of mental illness or addiction. And every time you have contact with a human service, you feel good. You think, they heard me. They see me and they are for me. They're on my side and they get me. That's when I think we can say, okay, we've got it.
And let's go one step further, because it is 10 years and we are looking blue sky, right? Lived experience is valued in every single job description in every single industry. Yeah. I know.
Yeah, I want to extend on that. And I think what you mentioned earlier in the previous panel is I want to put physical health when we go to a physio. There's conversations about mental health happening there. When I go to a hairdresser, I get my head shaved with not so much hair. The hairdresser is equipped and is trained to have conversations with me. We're having open, honest conversations about mental health and suicide, and it's not just something that happens behind closed doors, or we use language that's sort of doesn't talk about it but talks about it. We're openly and honestly having conversations in a world where peer work exists in every industry, within mining, within marketing, within engineering. It's not just a mental health industry problem. Like you said, we need to step away from that thinking and it be a part of every person's responsibility, every organization's responsibility. I can bet you some of the biggest CEOs in the world have been touched by mental health at some point in their life. So how can we embed lived experience beyond the mental health sector? That is a world that I wish for. I wish for where I go to a retail setting, customer service in Coles and Woolies, we are having open, honest conversations, because how do we know that that person isn't touched by mental illness? So it is really a world where I can go to the local library and there's a peer support worker sitting there and I can have a just general chit chat with them. Or I'm at the Woolies and there's someone there that I can have a chat to. It's not just at the hospital. It's not just in a NGO service delivery organisation. So that's the dream.
and there are models out there. I mean, Faye, you were talking to me about that accidental counsellor that the hairdressers were trained. My father's barber in New Zealand is they do counselling. The tall trees that we were talking about before is about putting the everyone, everywhere, everything, easy, equity into our society. Those 5 E's are really important. And the other thing I was thinking of, and I've completely lost it, but you were talking about it before. I know. No, it's gone. It might come back to me. So how are we then individual? Like, I'm talking to you right now as a person that you're not allowed to get off the stage until you tell me what you're going to do about this individually. So from your job and the positions that you hold, what are you going to do after today? What's your action?
I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to just do it. Meaning, the big takeout for me as a person with a bias for action is it needs to be substantiated. It needs to be co-designed properly. I loved that session. It needs to genuinely involve genuine lived experience, and I've very much connected with whoever was talking earlier about protecting the integrity of the genuine lived experience role. So I'm all for doing it, but what I'm going to do is make sure that it's done properly and it's properly checked out and it's properly substantiated. So that's my big takeaway, and it would be my call to action to the group as well, is do it, but don't just do it.
Fantastic. Great action. Thanks, Simon.
For me, lived experience leadership, I think someone I don't remember who, but they were talking about that with the word leadership can come a power or a hierarchy or a structure or a power imbalance. For me, leadership is role modeling. It's doing leading by example, doing the things that be the change in the world, that you want to see. That's a big statement, but doing little things that I can within my control that sets an example for the people within my peer support team, within the broader organisation, within my community. There are times where I've walked into a shopping centre and just gone up to a person who I feel is struggling and just had a chat with them. Hey, I noticed you're not looking yourself. Can you tell me more about what's going on for you? And that has opened up a whole lot where no one really checks in on each other anymore. So that is something that I want to continue to do. And my call to action to people is what's something you can do within your life for yourself or someone else. It can be as simple as what Eric shared, is just, on your walk home or to the tram stop, notice something within the world, or it could be more specific that you can take within your team, where how can you be that change for that person, where that person goes, if that person can do it, I can do it too. So being that hope, that
Yeah. And you reminded me in then of what I forgot before, which is we did a large co-design process a few years ago about a new service, and I asked 760 people, if we were going to put this new service in a place that you want it, where is that? And someone facetiously said, Bunnings. I'm there every Sunday. Put it there. And I thought, well, why not? Why don't we have a phone or counselling staff or somewhere where people are that doesn't hold prejudice? Jacqueline, what are you going to do? It's a big, important.
It's a very big,
Commissioner.
and think that the commission, one of our remits is hold government to account. So thinking through those recommendations that talk about embedding lived experience and lived experience leadership, start asking and querying and thinking about how can we develop a monitoring and reporting system that we can actually start measuring the sustainability of these roles, so that these are just everyday practice. It's not a one-off. It's not, we've had to do it for this period of time. It's just embedded. It's valued. It's considered, and all through the decision-making process, it is understood really, really well. So I guess that's, for me, the challenge that I'll take back with myself.
Fantastic. It's great. What's next for Equally Well, Russell? What are you going to do?
For us, it's sort of pretty easy but hard. We're going to collate all the information on the Padlets and on the post-it notes and on the posters. The Padlets, we'll send out the links to those. They'll be open for another week, so have a look at the other workshops. If you've got ideas, we want them, and we're going to bring that together, and we're going to try and look at starting a campaign, a call to action, open letter, and so we're looking to partner with everyone who is equally well. We are equally well. You are equally well. And Tim's description of the tree roots. Everything you do to uphold equality in health, human rights, and better physical health care, you're being an equally well ambassador. And when you do that, those tree roots go out and they join other tree roots and build a strength. That's collective impact. And so really what we're going to do is encourage and to partner with you, and our job is to sort of bring people together more. So really this is what we'll be doing, and when we say we, I mean we, and we'll be going out. So everything we do, and sometimes it's a small thing which will change the quality of someone's life for a decade, or in the case of our friends in Nehemiah, save someone's life, just to say, have you had this check? No. Had it. And they found out this person had a cancer that was treated and cured. If it wasn't, in 12 months' time, it would have been stage 4 terminal. That small action has given that family, that community, and their network 30 or 40 years of great productive life. Often we don't see the impacts of the actions that we do. At our last Equally Well conference here in 2019, there was a conversation between somebody who presented and someone on a health service. Because of that, they employed 4 new Equally Well people. We only found out about that about a year later when we came back here. That small conversation has a massive impact on hundreds of people. So that's what we're going to do, is advance that and really welcome you to partner with us. If you want to help us in any way, please. Simon thinks we're a big organisation. We're 4 part-timers, and one of the part-timers is only about 4 hours a week, and the rest of us are pro bono who work at unis and stuff. So we're small. So we are a backbone team. You are Equally Well. So just tell us what we can do to support you, and also do the fantastic stuff. You are here, so we want to continue to engage as much as you want to engage. So that's what we're going to do, is try and listen, hear, convert the fantastic contribution into action, and then and continue to work together collectively to make change.
That's awesome, Russell. Do you have to disappear? Yeah. Sorry, Simon's got to catch a plane. Please give a big round of applause to Simon. Thanks, Simon.
So, Tammy, what is yours?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Actually, Russell, while you were talking, it reminded me, has anyone seen the show Mr. Robot? Yeah. There's a quote that he said in the show that I was watching, he said, every day we change the world, but to change the world in a way that means anything takes more time than most of us have. Yet it doesn't happen all at once. I think one of the things we have to, because I come from the innovation world, a lot of people say to me, we need disruptive innovation. But we forget that the Ubers and the Airbnbs of the world weren't started overnight. We didn't just decide to fly to the moon. It started with inventing a light globe and inventing the radio. And each one of those acknowledgements was incremental. And disruption actually happens incrementally. So don't ever think that you're not having much of an impact, because it takes 1 million grains of sand to make a beach. So what am I going to do? I'm going to work with Camillo to make sure that South Australia has a Human Rights Act so that protects us as lived experience leaders to step up and take these positions of power and take them back, because without that as a human right underpinning the work we do, I think it's really hard for people to step up, particularly if they're not working in mental health and they don't want it as a career for the rest of their life. I'll also bring the tall trees over from New Zealand to Australia and re-embed it so that we've got real people, not us, no, people outside the mental health sector working. And every single conversation that I have when I'm working on policy is an Equally Well conversation. There is any doubt about that. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with before we open a bit for questions is what is your call to action for these guys?
It's not a call to action per se, but when we look at the system that it is and the conversations, the robust conversations that we were having, I really like recovery orientated language, and I can talk for hours and hours on what the government's not doing fine or what's wrong with the system. But I think it's important to look at what is going well and amplifying those. So I will take that statement individually. What's one thing that you are doing well that's helping change the system, and do more of it? That's my call to action.
Awesome. Jacqueline?
I think I was thinking about this, and I think that working and even sort of dabbling, as I've heard some people today speak about, working in the lived experience space, it is a hard space to work in. And there are a lot of people who have gone before us who've paved the way for us to be at this point. And I think in every situation, I think it's really important that we take good care of ourselves, find the people who think like you, and when there is an issue that perhaps, and I hate to think about it, but sometimes we're set up in systems where we have to tender against each other, or we have to be competing. Find a way of collaborating, find a way of work for all of us to join together and try and come and find the right place and the right note. And let's not be played off against each other, because that's just feeding the system. And I think we are all stronger if we're united as a collaborative, and we talk about collaborative, but it is sometimes really hard if you're working in a lived experience place and you are challenging and you have that power dynamic, that it is easy to turn on each other in the lived experience space and say this is too hard. But actually, if we're more collective in our voice, we're going to actually get more action. So I encourage us all to not only take care of ourselves, recognise the people that have come before us, believe in the future and think about how we're future-proofing this for the next generation of lived experience leadership. So I encourage us to really all get on the same page where possible.
I love that, and I'm going to use that to grow my analogy of 1,000,000 grains of sand, because a beach is long and wide, but we're still all individuals within that beach. But when you melt that, it becomes glass, right, which allows you to see the world a little bit differently. So when we all come together collectively, and we melt all our ideas together, we get a whole new way of looking at the world. Russell?
I'm going to build on your sand analogy here. It's one of my favourite things, which is imagine that there's one grain of sand that has your name written on it microscopically. It's been thrown on a beach somewhere. Your chances of being born are the same chance of you going to a beach and picking up one grain of sand and that's your name. We are so lucky to have an existence. So I think just celebrate our existence, celebrate one another. I've already done my call to action. When you go back, think about how do you celebrate your life and look after your life and just be present in the moment. This is a wonderful time. We are so lucky to be alive. Despite our circumstances, our chances of being alive and existence is that chance. So embrace that and make the most of it. It's the only existence that you have. So just enjoy, support one another, look after one another. And I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know your context. You know what you're going to do to support equally well and in human rights when you go back to your home community tomorrow or next week. You know that better than anyone. So it's not for me to tell you what to do. But we encourage you to think about that and what are you going to do, but to celebrate the fact of what a privilege. What a life.
Hard to top that. I have a fairly strange call to action, so bear with me, because I think that underlying our ability to be equally well, it actually starts with the language we use. And I was quite surprised when I moved back home to Australia after 20 years away that Australians still use the word stigma. And I've heard it a lot today, and I heard it a lot since I arrived 7 months ago. I'd like to challenge you to stop using the word stigma, and I'll tell you why. And instead use the words prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice and discrimination we can challenge in law. There are laws that stop people from doing those things. There is nothing to stop people being stigmatising, and nobody thinks they are. Yeah? When you think about all the social movements of the world that have got traction. You think of Black Lives Matter, you think of women's rights movement, you think of the rainbow rights movements. None of them talk about the stigma of being those identities. They talk about how proud they are of having those identities and experiences. I want us to be proud of our lived experience, and so therefore I want us to stop talking about stigma. That's my challenge to you. So now, does anyone have any questions for the panel? Everybody's so tired and wants to go home. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. I'll just build quickly on the sand theory, but not in the way you might expect. Do you have any comments or reflections on commercial determinants of health? So we talk about social determinants of health and all the rest of it. So because industry and organisations and companies, they drive inequity. You know, they shape our communities, they shape our culture, they shape society. You know, they have massive impacts on health, culture, you know, our contact with the environment through town planning, parks and, you know, all it has, you know, so the commercial determinants. And I can't remember who put it in their slides the other day, with the difference between...
It's my big bugbear.
Activism? The activism and advocacy. It was you. Yeah, so I'm just thinking of maybe another area of lived experience leadership could be developing more activism in terms of getting out there and getting amongst what they're passionate about and in people's faces. It can be an aspect of getting together and connection and being heard, as well as whatever you do in terms of addressing your health through this system. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts or reflections on any of that?
Don't get me started. I'm going to alienate everyone here. I think our capitalist commercial economy is toxic, quite frankly toxic, and it exploits people who are most vulnerable. I'll give you an example. We have the hard rubbish pickup in our town. I don't know if you have it in your suburbs. I love it. Here's all this stuff. But what I noticed is the affluent suburbs, there's virtually nothing out there. But the poorer suburbs have got heaps of stuff, these massive TVs, you know, these exercise machines and all that sort of stuff is on the thing. The marginalisation that the capitalists are exploiting people's feeling of being excluded and marginalised, and they feel better from buying stuff because they say, buy stuff and you'll feel better. It's a myth. It's a lie that's being sold by commercial determinants. What we know makes people feel better is being connected to nature, being connected to community, and feeling as though you're valued. So, I mean, that's one part. And Tammy, it's the first time I've come across that, and I'm going to exploit that to death. The commercial determinants is fantastic. I mean, in the policy field, there's so many vested interests in terms of people who get paid a lot of money to provide services, and a lot of small businesses who provide health and medical services as well. And quite frankly, it dominates the public policy discourse rather than a social, ecological approach to building up the well-being of communities. We're pandering to the commercial needs of the powerful elites who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars out of people's anomie or, you know, feelings of unwellness and marginalisation and sickness. So don't get me started. I think it's one of the worst things you know, in our communities, commercial capitalism, and social media is part of that. All of that advertising, all of that clickbait, it's addictive and it's commercially motivated and it's toxic and it's bad for us.
It also creates inequity for people accessing services, the commercialisation of it. It sort of people fall through the gaps. People who can't afford electricity bills, let alone a psychology appointment, forget about the Medicare, a better access, a number of appointments argument, let alone how much it costs to actually even see a psychologist. So the whole commercialisation. Yeah, I can keep talking for hours on this topic.
It's flown under the radar for too long. So I talked about activism and I talked about advocacy, and I think the commercial determinants are great lobbyists. You only have to look to America to see how powerful the gun lobbies are to create the problems that they've created. When we talk about obesity in this country, we're still blaming the people who are obese instead of the commercial determinants that have made them so because of poverty and resource and all those things. So I think we do have to kind of make that part of our agenda when we talk about social determinants. If you're writing anything about social determinants, just throw extra word in commercial, because it's social and commercial determinants we should be addressing, not one or the other. There has been a really great report done. I can't remember what university, but if you email me, I'll see if I can find it, on the commercial determinants for social and emotional health. It's really good. Yeah. Yep.
Hello. Yep. I guess building on that point, I think another thing with the commercial determinants is, like the food industry, advertising of like alcohol and gambling services and things. I worry about all that and how we can change that as well.
But we have before. I mean, I think who was talking about the pharmaceutical companies used to market their wares at conferences like this, and they don't anymore. And if we think of language was formed, that the whole misinformation around the chemical imbalance was because of the commercial determinants of pharmaceutical companies selling their wares to us. Now we have got rid of that, right? Mostly, to the most part. So we can do it. We've just got to be aware it exists.
I don't know. I guess that's what we're talking about, the commercial side of things. The money that's generated from, like food industry, like all the processed foods and sugars added, and it's like making it more addictive, and that's why we have rising obesity and other concerns. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you want to know one that is really rife, particularly in mental health, that we're not quite aware of, and I'd love everyone to advocate against? So in most human rights acts, if you've got one, there are exclusions in those acts. Those exclusions are there because of commercial determinants have lobbied for them. So you can be excluded for your mental health from life insurance, for example, or health insurance. You can be excluded from getting a job in risk-based industries. But we know, for example, that the German Air Wings disaster didn't occur because someone was depressed. It occurred because someone wasn't able to get the help for his depression because he would have been discriminated against. So when those sorts of things come up in our Human Rights Act, we've got to really fight and activate against exclusions, because human rights are human rights, full stop.
I'm just wondering, especially with your background, Tammy, on how to be really, effective with that. So we talk about social media and different things. We do have a few really good lived experience activists at the moment on social media. But it's an idea that I've kind of tossed around in my head, certainly with my business, that'll be my marketing strategy, because that's where my consumers predominantly get their information. So, one of the questions I regularly ask myself is, how do I make it so that the information and the content that I'm producing is effective, that it's what they want to consume, that they'd rather choose my content over the commercial, and that it's effective, both for the consumer and I suppose on the back end as well, because certain social media can produce profits, and I'm not going to complain if I get an extra couple of grand every year because of it, because that'll just go back into the services I provide.
I think there's probably a longer conversation than I can say just over a microphone now, other than there are a lot of different ways. It depends on the context, but you can look at the way some other countries have done it. So Hong Kong has an incredible collaboration between their mental health discrimination and prejudice campaign and identifying the biggest YouTube influencers in Hong Kong, and they work with the influencers for them to release the same content they always do anyway. They're not changing their content, but with their underlying edutainment message. I think edutainment is the way I've always done it. Coming from a film and television background, when we were talking about at lunchtime, I take research and then I go, what would that look like as a film or a play? And we use our artists, because people go and see art, but they don't necessarily read research reports. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. That's just a couple. Yeah. Mm. 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 Yeah. I think you make a really good point. We would all love for our jobs to be made redundant, honestly, wouldn't we? But you only need to look at this past year with things that we thought would never reappear in terms of global war and conflict and the way people think of particular other groups of society. We thought surely that can't happen again, and it's happening. So I think you're right, we may never not need equally well, but we do have to adapt with what the current world looks like. Yeah. Lee, you've got someone. Faye.
Two things. We talk about trauma-informed care all the time, and I think that we've lost a lot of services. Just they say it, they've got no idea what it actually is. But I was thinking about it. I put something on social media. I think we need to stop just looking at trauma-informed and look at betrayal and call that out as well, because there's the trauma. So sure, there's natural disasters and we have those traumas, but then how we're treated after that is often with betrayal. When we become unwell, in inverted commas, and our family with good intentions ends up with us locked up in a hospital. The betrayal, like we feel betrayed that they put us in there. Then we're betrayed by the services because we're traumatised further. And then, we go to doctors, we're calling it overshadowing. Well, but it's betrayal.
Yeah.
There's so many things that we're giving different names to that I think is actually betrayal. And as people, we don't cope with betrayal very well at all. And I think that that's what we're actually need to be calling out a lot more, that what we say is trauma is betrayal very often. And I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of what we need to do to change. We don't need reform. We need complete revolution around services so that we have the kinds of services that we need. But one of the things that really it's a question I really want to ask you, all of you, about, I really hate how our trauma, our betrayal, whatever, has been medicalised. I really love the idea of, getting out in nature and one thing and another, but are we going to call it green prescribing?
Mm-hmm.
And is that a good idea? Maybe it is. It's a full question I'm asking, and social prescribing. We'll go to a dance or go to the pub or whatever. Do we have to call it prescribing? Do we have to medicalise that our natural world by calling it prescribing? If it means that doctors are going to feel like they've done something by giving us a prescription that doesn't give us the side effects of what the prescriptions do, well, maybe we have to call it prescribing.
Still allows them to send a bill to you, right?
Yeah. Maybe if we, I really worry if it means that using that term and then prescribing is going to make the changes, then okay, I can live with that, let's do it. But is it, I just worry about, are we making everything natural and normal, like grief? We're medicalising everything. I wonder about the value of it.
Well, Faye, you've just given me two epiphanies, because I've always hated prescribing in that sense. I personally will probably argue against that. I don't like it. I don't think we need it. I don't think we need to co-opt medical language for anything else. And betrayal, gosh, that really hit me right here, because I think of all of the things, even in my most recent, like the last few days, and when anything has happened or I've felt triggered, it's betrayal. You're right. I say a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Joe from the PIMS up in Brisbane, the Peer Participation in Mental Health Services. One thing that was said very earlier on, but the one thing that I haven't heard in the last 2 days is a qualification or even an acknowledgement of a Cert 4 in mental health peer work. All I've heard is peer work or a peer worker. You know what I mean? So, and I've come across where I've applied for positions in NGOs, and this brings me up to my next subject, but to NGOs, and they say, well, sorry, but you've got to have a minimum of a diploma. I don't even know if you can get a diploma. I don't even know if you can get a PhD in peer work, because I'm not sure of the recognition of it. But what I was going to say is, like, I've done my Cert 4 mental health, Cert 4 mental health peer work. It would have been absolutely brilliant for me, instead of getting thrown into a hospital setting to do my RPL, like, here's the open door of the mental health unit, which I loved, because, it felt like home to me, to a degree. And okay, you get your peer work, then put those peer workers into positions where your NGOs, the NDIS, rather than, be hiring these people with an ABN that know nothing about mental health, nothing about health at all, and are glorified taxi drivers. And there's a nice, easy way, and that's what I feel we could end up with a sustainable workplace.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's arguments have been going on for as long as I've been doing this work about professionalising the workforce. But who does that leave out when we do that? And I think there needs to be kind of multiple avenues for coming into this work. That we've got some places in the world that do apprenticeships. We've got some places in the world that are developing PhDs in MAD studies, and I think there needs to be kind of everything in between. It's blurring the boundaries a little bit. How are we going for time, guys? Are we nearly... We've probably got time for one more question.
not so much a question, but after Faye's comment, it made me think that I think one of the other needs of the industry that, at least that I identify, is we need more education around service providers across all levels, around the different types of trauma, and the different types of care and support they need. So, for example, someone with PTSD from the army, it's been shown that, and I'm not a clinician, so I don't know the details, but what I do know is that their neuropsychiatry is very different to, say, someone with PTSD from domestic violence, and you would prescribe, both through social prescribing or medical prescribing, a different support system for that person versus a DV survivor. And then again, you can get someone with complex trauma, and then it's a whole other host of suite of medication and supports as well. And that's really important, because for some of them, especially like complex trauma, it's been shown to respond more effectively to maybe a little bit of medication, but holistic supports are significantly more effective, and their brains are neuropsychiatrically affected differently. And I say that as someone diagnosed with CPTSD. And so my experience has been, it was really hard. It took, 15 years to get access to someone, and eventually I went to my GP and said, I think I need a psychiatrist because I need an authority. And he said, look, I know someone, you're going to have to travel 3 hours to see him, but he's a retired forensic psychiatrist. Are you happy to see him? And I did, and he was wonderful, and I saw him for 6 years before he retired, and he fought like a battle axe for me. And I mean, he really fought the system for me too, because I was trapped in that cycle of people going, oh no, she's physically sick because she's insane. And he was like, no, she's not, and you don't get to do that. She's physically sick, and we need to deal with that before we can even deal with the anxiety and depression, because there's something really physically wrong with her, and that will never get better while the physical things. So my point is, and I say that now, who work on boards that specialise in complex trauma, that and just a little bit of self-directed research that I've done, that those three things, they're actually quite different from each other. But even a lot of psychiatrists and therapists, they don't identify that they're different, and they treat them identically, and it can end up with worse outcomes. And so I think that, especially from a lived experience perspective, because like CPSD is definitely one where a lived experience perspective, having a peer, it helps. And I see that all the time in the peer work that I do because of the region I work in. And it really helps. And I think having that enshrined in some kind of policy would also go a long way, because that's the sort of thing there's already the research there to embed that and go, this is a good case for the similar diagnosis.
What you're demonstrating there is pretty much Faye's point. I mean, the diversity of our experiences and the dialectic of that, and the difference that we all host, regardless of whether we've got the same diagnosis, really boils down to us taking the medical words out of the language. If we started calling it betrayal, are we going to have a prescription for that? No, we're going to have a conversation, aren't we? We're going to, in fact, if there was a prescription for that, it would be called Don't Be a Dick, right? Yeah. There's my last words. Thanks for having me. Can we have a big round of applause for our wonderful panellists?